Music theory with OneNote. Modal distance names versus scale degree interval names. Spoiler alert, the modal distance names wins by a long shot, but it's still worth watching just to see how badly the scale degree intervals get pummeled into the ground. That's what we're here for, people. That's what we're here for. So get ready and some coffee, because although we're playing with just one note, it's a beautiful note. You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of the Modal node system, MNS presentation 1210, OneNote modal distance names versus scale degree interval names, one of many presentations listed on the right. We plan on adding plenty more to them shortly. Also noting, in this OneNote presentation, we could spend all of our time looking at the music theory side of things, but we do have another presentation by a similar number and name where we build these tables out in Excel. Excellent practice for both Excel as well as our music theory, as well as just kind of visualizing the tables, which unfortunately for most people, because most people don't like visualizing tables, it is a necessary part of really understanding what is happening to be able to liberate yourself to be more creative. All right, we're going to go through an analogy that we are going to repeat over and over ad nauseum, because I think this is the optimal way that we want to be visualizing the guitar. And as we go through all of our ideas of theory, we want them to serve the purpose of navigating the fretboard. Therefore, I would think about the fretboard as a map of the territory, like the Earth here, having 7 continent locations on it. Actually has 12 total locations, but the non-continent locations are like the oceans. We go through them to get to the continent locations. Our head is like in space above the fretboard, above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling, looking down on the world of the fretboard and seeing that it actually rotates around just like the Earth does. And as it does, we're going to give it 12 degrees of rotation, calling those the notes in the musical alphabet, typically working in the collection of notes that we have named after note number 4, the C note, but noting that if we move everything up to C sharp, to D sharp, and so on, all the continents shift just like where the globe is going around in a circle. Therefore, once we've seen the degree that we want to be visualizing the world in, we no longer want to name it by the note names, but by the continent name equivalents, which could be the Nashville number system, which is basically a permanent number system based on the major scale, which is another way to just do the modes. In other words, the 1 is the Ionian, the 4 is the Lydian, the 3 is the Phrygian, and the Mixolydian is the 5, and so on and so forth. That's the optimal way to visualize the fretboard, to unlock it, as they say, to be able to navigate through the fretboard. The problem is that scale degree terminology throws us off. It forces us to rename or think that we have to rename the fretboard when we don't. It makes us think that we have to change North America to South America, in other words, from an analogy standpoint, when obviously from a normal navigation perspective, that's stupid. We don't want to do that. All right, so why does it do that? It's because we use scale degrees. So we want to keep in mind and not let the scale degree terminology, because it was done, I believe, in error, throw us off from visualizing the fretboard the way you want to. Again, I would analogy this to like a lawyer. A lawyer is insinuating they're trying to call you a bad person or whatever for their client's purposes, and everything they say is some insinuation that you're a bad person. That would be similar to saying, I'm trying to have a major third from this note, which is a Mixolydian 5th, and a major third in order to get over to here. So that means you're insinuating that this is the 1. You're trying to call me names over here. It's not the 1. I'm the 5. I'm the Mixolydian. I'm not the Ionian. I'm not the major, but you're calling me the major. You're changing my name. You're giving me all these innuendos within the names that you're talking about. You have to cut through all that stuff when you talk to those kind of people and just say, hey, look, I don't even care what insinuations you're saying. I'm just going to get the relevant piece of information, which is that you're trying to go 4 notes away. That's what we're trying to do here. Don't let them alter your mindset with manipulative words, man. So here's the general idea, just to recap this as we go in. So just keep this in mind as we go. What's the problem? Intervals are unnecessarily, confusingly, and incorrectly using 3 different units of measure at the same time, dropping the most fundamental measurement from the name entirely, making a devastating error on the second most fundamental measurement, and stuffing in an unneeded third measurement, causing more confusion than clarification. So here's a typical kind of interval. It's a major third. Notice the primary unit of measure are half steps, and there's no half steps in this term. So you would think that I would recommend when you say this interval, you're going to say it's a 4-note away major third, because I want to reiterate in my mind, particularly when on a guitar, which isn't totally linear, we have multiple strings, what the normal distance within at least a 12-note range is. That's the most important thing, and it's not in the standard term. Also, this third is a measurement term. That's basically measuring the notes that are in the scale, the distance from the notes within the scale. But instead of measuring from the note, they included the note that they're on in the measurement. That's the difference between a normal measurement, like normal people would do it, and what we would call a scale degree measurement, which would be like measuring the head of the person if you're trying to find the distance from his head to the top of the basketball hoop, and you called his head foot number 1 instead of starting to measure above his head. So this is a real problem. This causes a bunch of issues that we'll look at, and why I would recommend at least realizing that the true distance term is always 1 unit down, what we call in computer science or normal kind of engineering, an off by 1 problem. You started when you should have started at 0, you started at 1, and now everything is off by 1, and it's causing all kind of havoc when it perpetuates through the system. And then we have this M. This is another measurement tool trying to measure all of the intervals to the measurement of the major scale, which makes sense historically when the major scale was the primary scale being used and whatnot. Everything was kind of measured that way, but that's no longer really the case. That's causing more confusion. Why? Because if I was to measure from, say, this note, same collection of notes, then I'm going to call that a major third away. But I'm not on the third. I'm on the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th within our collection of notes, or you would call it the Lydian within our collection of notes. So it's kind of confusing, and you're also not on the 1 per se, or even if you make it the 1 from a scale degree, you're not on the major scale, you're on the Lydian scale. So that the whole thing is causing way more problems than it needs to cause. And this is uncontroversial, okay? This is not controversial. I'm not saying that we can get away from the interval terminology because we've been using it so long, but I will want to suggest that you need to realize these issues with it so that you can figure out the best way to deal with these terms in a way that allows you to do what you want to do and not be manipulated like a lawyer tearing you apart on the stand. All right, so our general ideas, we've got our numbers. There's 12 notes in the musical alphabet. We can give them letters. We have A, B, C, and so on, and then the sharps and flats. I'm not going to put a sharp or a flat kind of thing. I'm just going to say it's an A, B. The small A, B means it's either an A sharp or B flat, whichever way we are going on it. And then we're going to have this term is going to give us the number and the letter. So this is just our 12 notes within the musical alphabet. Within those 12 notes, we apply our formula, which we typically are working in the key of C, but I can start this formula on any other note and get a collection of notes from any note. Therefore, there would be 12 different collection of notes that we typically play in Western music. That would be like having 12 crayon boxes. They all have similar colors, but they're all hued differently, let's say, right? And then within each of those crayon boxes, we can decide which color is going to be the primary color. That would be the modes within each of them. So we're going to say if I take whole step, half step, whole, and then keep going down here to the second. If we repeat in a circle, we get the last couple ones here down here. So it goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, and then it would go half step to get back home again. All right, so if we took those 7 notes, here's our 7 notes. That's going to be our collection of notes. We're going to be working in the key of C all the time, but don't let that throw you off because it's the same intervals for all other 12 collection of notes. We can give them an absolute mode, which Nashville number system would give a number. If you use the Nashville number system, people will talk about that as though it's like a shortcut, a hack. It's not a hack. That's the best way to see it. And it's not that you're not looking at modes right there. You're just assigning the mode a number. You're thinking modally when you're doing a Nashville number system, which is better. It's more appropriate to do. That's actually a better system. It's a more sophisticated system. It's a less muddy system than the current system with scale degrees. That's why it developed. So we could give it a number here as well. So given that information, we can now measure all of our distances. Notice these are the maps of the territories. You can think about these as the continents. If you have the continents and you're playing a video game, what do you want to do? You want to find the distances through all the continents, so whenever I need to go to any particular location, I can find the distance. Now, if I change the order of when I go to a continent, if I start on North America and I go to South America and then Africa, and then I go to Asia and then Africa back to North America and the South America, do I need a different map quest to go from North America to South America because I went there in a different order? No, you need the same map quest, right? All I need to know is A to B. What's the distance from A to B? I already have it. I don't care what happened before I went from A to B. It's the same. That's the same here, right? These continents are the same. Just because I changed the order of when I'm going from the D to the Y doesn't mean I need a new map quest, right? It's the same distance. It's the same thing. It's even easier than that, however, because if you think about the continents, we really have a block situation. So you're on a block and you're going around the block. So you could, if I'm on like South America here and then I'm going to Antarctica, how do I get there? Well, we have 2 units of measure now. Either I can go continent to continent, which would be 1, 2, 3 continents up, or I can go continents and oceans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 continents and oceans up. Those are our 2 kind of units of measure that we're basically using that are going to be implied in our interval structure. Notice the scale degree messes up the measurement. The scale degree makes this South America as though it's now we're going to call it like Asia because we're started there. Because we started there, we're going to call that the 1, 2, 3, 4. So now this is a 4th scale degree, but from a normal measurement, it would be 1, 2, 3, a 3rd modal half step. So I'm going to introduce a term of modal half step and allow you just to think about, you want to learn the scale degrees, but remember that they're all too high by 1 because the measurement, I mean, there's no argument that the measurement is wrong, okay? Nobody, if you were to do this right now, nobody would do it with a scale degree system. They would do it with a measurement system. But we're stuck with the scale degrees. That's fine. Let's just recognize the issue so that we can measure it properly. They're all off by 1, okay? That's the issue. Okay. So if we go up here and then we check it out, then we have how many measurements could we have? If there's 12 notes, then we could have a measurement between each of them. I can go from the let's say the A to the B. I can go to the A sharp. I can go A to the B. I can go A to the C. I can go A to the C sharp, A to the D, right? So all of those different measurements mean that we have 12, including 0 to 12 or to 11, right? 0 to 11 or 12 different measurements. Those are the intervals that are within 1 octave and not including going negative. So in other words, we're visualizing this going around the block 1 time. You could go around the block 2 times, and you could envision this as kind of a 3D graph that's popping out, right? So then you still have repetition pitch-wise, but then you also have distance. And you could imagine going backwards. We'll talk about going backwards later. We'll talk about octaves later. But right now, we're going to think about it as a clock face, and everything is going around repetition in one area, which gives us kind of the flavor of the interval. All right, so let's just name these out. If we go if we stay on the same note, we're on C, and then we stay on C, then we call that a unison. You might call it a perfect first. Now there's a little bit of inconsistency with the name, because I'm going to try to say that this name, this perfect first or perfect zero, or what is going to be the same as we go octaves up, meaning I could keep the flavor as though it's in one octave. So it gets a little wonky with the unison terminology. But note that if I'm on the C here, if it's a scaled, if it's a collection of notes, then I would say, did I move anywhere from that distance? No, I didn't move anywhere. What's the distance that I moved? 0, right? But from a scale degree standpoint, we're going to call it a first. You see the problem here? It should be 0 distance, but we're going to call it a first. So, and we also don't actually put the distance traveled. So you would think that the perfect first, I would call it, say it in your mind when you're doing this, it's a 0 note away perfect first, particularly on the guitar when you can't see the distance. So you don't want to memorize it just by shape. You want to memorize it by shape and distance, and the distance term has been dropped from the interval term, so add it back because that's the most important term. Now, again, if you were to do this properly, I think the proper term would be a 0 note away. If you're going to keep the perfect, you can keep the perfect and then 0, not 1, because it would be 0 modal half steps, which would mean 1, which would give me a 1 or first step away, right? So it'd be 0 modal half steps. Now, I'm going to introduce later the idea of a modal range, meaning it's going from I to I. We didn't go anywhere. We're going from one continent and staying on that continent. And then we can also name that with the Nashville number system. The modal range is 1 to 1, I to I. And we can also then say, I think this would be the more proper naming convention, because everything in it gives you information. It's a 0 note away from the Ionian node in this case, and it's 0 modal half steps forward. I'll talk about this later. This is so right, but right now I just want to get to this idea. It's a 0 note away, perfect 0 modal half steps, which would be the first scale degree. This would be the proper term. This would be the improper term. Now, why do we have a perfect? Perfect basically there are some intervals just historically that they thought were better or more perfect, and therefore they're going to name them perfect. But the general idea was that we're going to give you all the intervals on the major scale, right? And then everything that's not in the major scale, we're going to call them something else, like a minor, or possibly, if we have to, then default to augmented or diminished, which is just a unit up or a unit back. So if it's, from a practical standpoint, you can kind of think if it's a perfect, then it's going to be in most of the different modes. In other words, if I start on any of these other modes, I will still typically have a perfect, whereas a major will often be a minor if you go to the minor modes, which we'll see more later. Now we're going to skip the 1 note distance and go to a 2 note distance. So we're generally thinking as though we're on this Ionian node, which in our case is going to be the C, and we're going to go distances from it. Now remember, we apply these same terms for our general distance terms. So you could pick any of the notes and say we're going up a major second to indicate that it's a 2 note distance. You could also say it's going to be a whole step away, which would be great or better term if there's no context within a scale. But if you go 3 notes up or 4 notes up, the typical distance names do have scale implications, which again is kind of an issue, kind of a problem. We'll talk more about that later. But for right now, we're going to imagine that we're measuring from the Ionian node, which is basically the major scale. That's because the intervals historically were built off of the major scale, right? And then they kind of, just like with the keys on the piano, we started with actually 7 notes, and then they kind of jammed in the other notes to get up to 12, which is the reason we have sharps and flats. Similarly with the intervals. The intervals are kind of based on the major scale, and then we kind of shoved in what we needed to fit in all of the other intervals, which again leaves us with kind of a mess, right? But that means that we're going to be thinking about the distance from this Ionian first, measuring everything to it. Now, if something is in the major scale, if it's a distance that lands us on a note from the Ionian node, which is in the major scale, then that's going to be named either a major something, a major interval, major scale degree, or it's going to be a perfect. Why perfect? Because again, the perfect was more solid, it was thought to be. So that means that if something is either major or it's perfect, that means it's an interval that is in the major scale, meaning if you start on the 1 of the major scale, you will not land in the ocean if you use that distance term from that point. That's not the case if you start on any other note, but that's going to be the idea of it. That's where they're built from. Now, if it's not major or perfect, usually it'll be a minor, which you would think would indicate that it's going to be in the main minor or Aeolian mode, the minor scale. That's not necessarily the case. That's not how it was really built. It was built by saying, we're going to name all the ones that are in the major key, and everything else we're just going to dump into minor, or if we have to, kind of augmented or diminished, which is going to be the funny 6th one. All right, so if we go down here, we're going to call that a capital M second. The capital M sometimes is replaced with an MAG because sometimes the fonts for capital and lowercase aren't clear as to whether it's capital or lowercase, or when they did it by hand, sometimes that's a little bit more difficult to see. So then I would notice that this does not give you the distance. The distance is 2. So if someone says it's a major second, you're basically thinking that's equivalent to like a whole step from a distance, just a strict distance terminology. And I would add then the distance, particularly if you're on the guitar. It's a 2-note away major second. Now, again, you could go an octave up, higher than 2 notes away, but still the flavor is 2 notes away. What would that be? It would be 2 plus 12 notes away major second. The flavor would still be a 2-note away kind of major second flavor. So I would put that into the name so that you can get the idea and concept of the distance. And if you're talking about something other than the first note of the major scale, you want to know it just as distance, because the fact that it's major doesn't give you any more information really, or that it's the second of the scale doesn't really give you any information. It just means it's 2 notes away. Now note that 2 note away is a scale degree. So if I started on the Ionian and I went to the Dorian, it would be the second scale degree, which is how many notes away? 1, 2 notes away from the notes away. That's really wrong measuring over here. It should be 1 step up from the collection of notes in the Ionian node. So I would put in your mind that you want to basically say a 2-note away major second has a distance term that would be more proper of a 2-note away major first modal half step. Or in other words, a 2-note away major first modal half step would be the second scale degree if you make this the 1. But oftentimes if you're down here, you're not going to make it the 1. You just call it a 2-note away, first modal, so modal half step to get you here. All right, now I'm not going to get into this term. We'll get over here later. Again, the major and the minor and the perfects, I don't think are the optimal way to say this. Because you might not be measuring from the Ionian, and you're still calling something a major or a perfect or whatever. So this term would be better served if it told you the location that you're measuring from, or not have it at all. It would be easier just to say it's a 2-note away first modal half step, or a 2-note away second scale degree. Would actually be more clear, I believe, than saying it's a major second, because it gives you the actual notes or the distance. All right, but in any case, now I'm going to skip the 3-note away because that's not in the thing. I'm going to say it's a 4-note away. So if we start on the Ionian and I go 4 notes up, 1, 2, 3, 4, we land on a continent. We don't land in the ocean. If I went 3 notes up, we'd land in the ocean. All right, so if I go 4 notes up, then what is that? We're gonna say it's a third. Why is it a third? Because if I make this the 1, it's 1, 2, 3. So if I make that the 1, it's 3 up. It shouldn't be 3 up. It shouldn't be the third scale degree. It should be 2 up, 2 modal half steps up from the Ionian. That would make more sense. But no, we're going to count this as the first thing that we're measuring, 1, 2, 3, call it the third scale degree. So we're going to call that then a major third. This is going to be one of the most important intervals because that's the interval that really determines whether a chord that we'll talk about later and or a mode itself is a major mode or a minor mode. It has a 4-note away distance, which we call a major third. Now again, I would rather call that a 4-note away major third, or I would recommend, and I always say 4-note away major third when I say the major third, because I want to reiterate that in my mind because that's the thing that's the most important. And because again, I could call something a major third starting on any note and not have the context of a scale degree. I'm just trying to give a distance, and people will still call that a major third distance. And that's going to lead you to think, well, that means that the point you started on must be the 1. But it's not necessarily the 1. They're just talking about it as a distance of 4 notes away, right? So then, so I would rather call it a 4-note away second modal half step. So if someone says it's a 4-note away major third, the third is off by 1 from a normal measurement standpoint. It's a 4-note away second modal half step. So whatever node you are on, typically we're measuring from the Ionian, we're going up from this standpoint, we're going up 2. But notice I could also be on the Lydian and I could go up 2. It would still be a 4-note away second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. I could be on the mixed Lydian and go up 2. Now the reason I'm choosing Lydian and mixed Lydian, the Y and the X, or on the 4 and the 5, is because if I'm on the F and I go 4 notes away, 1, 2, 3, 4, I land on the A. That's because starting on these 2 other notes are the other major chords, the 1, 4, 5 chords, which are the other major modes, the Ionian, the Lydian, the mixed Lydian. They're all the same, right? So, and they all have that distance that's the same if you start from those points. So if you used 2 notes away and you have this in order, then you can always say, oh yeah, it's a 4-note distance if you go 2 modal half steps up from the Ionian, the Lydian, and the mixed Lydian nodes, right? I don't need to make these the 1 to go to say that it's the same modal distance away, all right? That's the problem. Okay, so then if I go to the next one, 5 notes away, we call that a perfect fourth. So 5 notes away is a perfect fourth. So now once again, we've got the perfect term instead of the major term. Why? I think it's because they actually the perfect fifth down here was thought to be so stable and such a great interval, and then the perfect fourth is the inverse of the perfect fifth. Therefore, if the perfect fifth is great, you have to call the perfect fourth, the inverse of it, great as well. But in any case, that for us means that it's going to be in most of the modes. So a 5-note distance is so solid that it is in most of the modes. So the perfect kind of helps us in that way. It's a very solid distance. But again, I would rather memorize it that it's a solid distance in most of the modes because it's 5 notes away, not because you put a P in front of it. The P shouldn't be telling me that it's a very solid distance. The 5 should be telling me. The 5 notes away distance shows up a lot in all of the modes. If I start on any of these nodes and I go 5 notes away, I get to a distance, and all of them I land on a continent unless I start from the Lydian. So I don't want to memorize that by saying all of them have a perfect fourth. I want to memorize it by saying all of them have a distance from the continent that lands on another continent that does not put us in the ocean if I go 5 notes up from that, or which would be 4 modal or 3 modal half steps would be 4 scale degree up. And I would rather say it was a 5-note away perfect third modal half step. So remember, these are 2 distance terms. So it's 5 notes away, which is dropped. I want to add it back. Perfect. Okay, whatever. You need something in between the numbers, but the 5 is the important thing. And then it's a 4th scale degree, which means, okay, that's because it's off by 1. It should be a 3rd modal half step, right? Because if I'm on the Ionian, I would go up 1, 2, 3 to get to here. 5 steps distance-wise would be here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It gets us to the Lydian. So I would even call that, from a continent standpoint, which we'll introduce next time, a modal range. Where are you going? What's happening here? Well, I'm going from the Ionian to the Lydian. I'm going from the 1 to the 4 from a Nashville number system. I can name the 2 points easily because I'm not going to rename the 2 points as a scale degree every time I'm starting from a different location. Each of these locations has the same distance to any of the other locations particularly easily because we're only going around a block. It's always going in the same order. All right, if I go 6 notes, that's a tritone. We'll go back to that one later. 7 notes, that's the other perfect. 7 notes away, we call that a perfect fifth. So again, this is the inverse. We'll talk about inverses later. But this is the one where they thought this was such a great interval and whatnot. So even though it's just another one of the intervals in the major scale, we're going to call it perfect. So, but again, it's how many notes away is it? It's 7 notes away. So I would name that and say, and I get these mixed up. I think I got it mixed up in my last presentation, the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth, because the perfect fifth isn't 5 notes away, it's 7 notes away, right? So, but I would say, look, it's a 7 note away perfect fifth, and that'll help you to kind of get it in your mind, as opposed to the 5 note away, which is a perfect fourth, right? So those two things are easy to get mixed up, which I do all the time, and I apologize for. So bear with me as I my mind gets those backwards all the time. So it's a 7 note away perfect fourth. So so that means that if I was gonna, it should be that 7 notes away is if I start here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it lands us on the X, which is for Mixolydian mode, or the fifth from a natural number system. If I start here, it's going to be, if I count that as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's why it's the 5th scale degree. But really, I should count from here 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4 modal half steps up. Notice if I say it's modal half steps up, I have to determine the node that I'm on, because the note distance is not always the same. But if I know the node that I'm on, then the distance is always going to be the same, because again, the things are always in order. They were going around the block. So I would prefer to call it a 7 note away perfect 4th modal half step. That would be a more precise or proper measurement term in my mind, I think, just objectively. So if someone says it's a 7 note away perfect 5th, or just perfect 5th, I would say in my mind, okay, it's a 7 note away perfect 4th modal half step, which is a 5th scale degree. See, and that allows you to then see distance-wise and actually count it on the guitar or the piano properly. And it allows you to do it without making whatever note is the 1. If they do that from here, it's a perfect 5th from here, from that E. I don't need to rename this to say, okay, that's the 1 now. It was the 3 or the Phrygian, and now it's the Ionian or something, right? I don't need to do that, because I'm just going to say, okay, it's a 7 note away, and it's a perfect 5th, which is a 4th modal, half step up. Okay, so then the next one is going to be, where did my cursor has frozen? Let's go to the next one. We're going to skip the 8 note away, and we're going to go to the 9 note away, which is a major 6, because the 8 note away is not in the major mode. It'll land you in the ocean. So a 9 note away is going to be a major 6. So we're going to call that a major 6, capital M6 or MAG 6. And we're going to say that if someone says major 6, I would add the 9. Major 6, what does that mean primarily? It means that it's 9 notes away, unless it's an octave higher or something like that, in which case you add 12 to it. So I would call it a 9 note away major 6. So if you start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Gets you from the Ionian to the Aeolian if you start on the Ionian. So if I'm on the Ionian, then, and if I make that the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6th scale degree. But scale degree isn't exactly the proper term, because I can have these same collection of notes and start from any node within them. So I'd prefer to call it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree. So if someone says it's a major 6, I'm thinking in my mind, all right, it's a 9-note away major 5th modal half step, which would be the major 6th scale degree. And I would like to replace the major with whatever node I'm on. Right? I don't even need the major. I could just say it's a 9-note away 5th modal half step or 6th scale degree. And if I was on like the Lydian or something like that, right? And then I could say, and so I would like to call it a 9-note away. If I keep the major 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree. All right, 10 is not going to be in as well, so we're going to move then to 11. So I'll remove these. I'm going to try to keep this one for now. What's going on here? Get this over here. Okay, so it's going to be an 11-note away major 7th, which we can call a capital M7. And again, if someone says it's a 11-note away major 7, I would add, if they say just major 7, I would add the 11. Say it's an 11-note away major 7, and beyond that, I would say it's an 11. If someone says it's a major 7, I'm thinking 11-note away, maybe major. I can keep the major in there, but I'd like to use another term. But 11-note away, 6th modal half step, which is the 7th scale degree. So in other words, if I was on this as the one, if that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7th scale degree. But if I count from that point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6th modal half step from a proper distance standpoint, that's going from the Ionian node to the Locrian node. If I count all the notes, including the oceans, it's going to be from here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Gets me to a landmass of the Locrian, or the 7 Nashville number system. All right, let's go back to the minors that we skipped now. So the ones that we skipped is a minor second. So now we have, so the minor second, why is it's a 1-note away? It's a minor second. Why is it a second? Well, it's still, we still are using the idea of scale degrees. And if I go from the first to the second, I don't quite make it to the second here. So it's from the perspective of the major, it's one step back. So you can see it as basically the minors are typically a flattened or one step back from the major. So normally, so basically everything that is a major here and not a perfect will have the minor, which is one step back, which normally you can think of as the minor will be in the main minor, which is the same collection of notes if it's the relative minor starting from the A or Aeolian. That would be the minor scale. Same collection of notes, but you start from the 6, 7, up to here. But they make that the 1. I wouldn't make it the 1. I would use the Nashville number system idea and keep that as the 6. The minor just means you're on the continent of Aeolian, and that's your center point. And you measure everything from that continent. I don't need to rename the continent. If I want to name it continent number 6, then I keep it at continent number 6. It's the same continents, right? But you would think that there would be a distance from that minor if I went 1 note away, and it wouldn't land me in the ocean. But it does. It does land me in the ocean. So that means that, notice what happened here is they made all the intervals based on the major and then made the minors flattened of it, one step down. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that interval is in the main minor, and the major exception is this minor, which is the 1 note away minor second is still in the main minor, which is the minor scale or Aeolian mode. It's not in it is in the Phrygian. It's not in the main minor. It is in the Phrygian. If I started on the Phrygian and went 1 note up, it's in that one. All right, let's go to the next one. Let's go to the minor third. So once again, the major third was 4 notes away. That means the minor third is going to be 3 notes. Is going to be 3 notes away. So it's going to be a flattened of the majors. Let's show both of them here. So here's the major third, and then there's the minor third. So the minor third is in the main minor in the Aeolian. So if I started from the Ionian here and I went 3 notes up, I'll go 1, 2, 3, lands me in the ocean. That's why they still have to call it a third though, because if I count this way from these 7 notes, if I go up, it's going to be almost to the third, but it doesn't get there. So really from the major scale, it should be something like, from a scale degree, it should be 1, 2, it's like 2.5, right? Because it's not actually the third. It's in between the second and the third. So from the perspective of the major scale, which is what everything is made from, you would think it would be like, you would think it would be the 2.5, scale degree or whatever. But if you look at the minor, it works, because if I was on the Aeolian and I go up 3, it goes 1, 2, 3, then I land on a continent. So this one is a third in the minor scale. But again, that's not always the case. That's not really how they built it, because this one isn't a second in the minor scale. I hope I got the second and third right. So then we have the perfects. Now the perfect is in both the major and the minor. And then we got this really weird one, which is the 6th note away. Now, if you think about a clock face, the 6 is right in the middle. So we went halfway through. The 6th note away is not a distance that is in most of the if I start on any of these continents, I can't generally go 6 notes away without landing in the ocean. The exception is that the Lydian has it, but it's kind of weird because that's an augmented 4th, and then the Locrian has it, and that's going to be a diminished 5th. So typically when you hear 6 note away, they have to use some term. They couldn't use a minor. Why? Because the next one up, the 7 note away, is a perfect 5th. They used a perfect term. They didn't use a major term. Like, okay, what you would expect using their terminology is they wouldn't use perfects, they would use all majors, right? And then you would expect this 6 to be a minor 5th, right? Because it would be in between the 4th and the 5th. We didn't quite get to the 5th. But they wanted to call, I believe this is what happened, right? They wanted to call the perfect 5th because that was such a cool interval. That's what they made, like the perfect of 5th is made out of the 5ths, and all the stacking of the intervals happened. So they want to call that a special interval of the perfect 5th, but then it doesn't really make sense to have a flat perfect, like the minor thing doesn't quite work, right? So that's when you had to introduce the idea of a diminished 5th, which is a diminished is the default term if there's no other term being used, to just say it's 1/2 step backwards. Okay, but again, that's not really the important thing, because I would rather just call it's a 6 note away 5th, or more precisely, it's a 6 note away 4th modal half step, because that's going to be basically the distance term that will help us to determine how far it is away from the node we're measuring from, and distance-wise. The perfect and the D don't really help me that much, right? They're not really that useful. All right, so then if I go to the minor 8 note away, this is a minor 6. Why? Because the major is here. So the major 6, if I go scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is here. So if I go and that's 9 notes up. But if I go 8 notes up, I'm going to be in between. So again, you would think they would call it a major 5.5 scale degree, because it's in between. But no, they're just going to say if it doesn't land you on a continent, if it lands you in the ocean, we're just going to call that a half step back. We're still going to call it a 6th, comparing it kind of like to the major scale, but we're going to flatten it and say it's a half step back. It's going to land you in the ocean, right? So that's going to be a minor 6. Now, if I go 8 steps up from the Aeolian, then we don't land in the ocean. So that does what you would expect. If I'm on the Aeolian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands me on an F. The F is the Lydian, so we're still good. But if I'm on the Ionian, I go up 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands me in the ocean, right? And then we've got the minor 7. So the minor 7, the major 7 is an 11 note away major 7. So therefore, if I went scale degree up to the 7, it would be here. You would think scale degree would be down. If it's 10 notes away, it would be a 6.5 scale degree. But they don't want to do a 6.5. They just want to say it doesn't land you on a continent here. Therefore, we're going to say it's flattened. That's what the minor means. It's back a half step. It's going to land you in between if you're starting from the Ionian. And that happens to work, however, if you start from the Aeolian, the main minor. So if I'm here and I go up 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, lands me on the G or Mixolydian, so that lands me on a continent. So from a practical standpoint, learning these intervals, you can say if it's a major or if it's a perfect, it's going to be in the major scale. And if it's not in the major scale, they're typically going to call that a minor, which is going to be flattened, bringing it back one. That works for all of the minors except the minor second, which is still in the which is not in the Aeolian or the minor scale. Still, the minor scale still has a major second. So that kind of is useful, but again, it doesn't really work when you extend it to the other modes, because you might learn that if you're in the context of the major scale, the 1, 4, 5 are the major chords, which are also the major modes. The 2, 3, and 6 are the minor chords and the minor modes if you build a chord off it. The 7 is the Locrian, which is a minor and a flat fifth, basically. So this idea of the minors being in the minor mode and the majors being in the major isn't all that helpful, because it's not going to follow all the way through to the other two minor modes and major modes. Meaning, the fact that something is in the major scale doesn't necessarily tell you if it's in the other major modes, which is the 4 and the 5, the Lydian and the Mixolydian. The fact that something says minor in it doesn't necessarily tell you that it's in the minor scales. It might not be in the Dorian, the Phrygian, and the Aeolian. It's not really helping you, and it kind of throws us off into thinking without looking at distances. The distance is the thing that's important, right? So again, you can eliminate this middle term altogether if you add the first term, meaning give me the distance and the scale degree. If I know the distance and the scale degree, that's the thing that should be telling me the flavor. That's the thing that should be telling me which of these nodes I can start from and whether or not I'm going to land in the ocean or not. And so I would replace this center term with something useful that's not confusing, which would be the node. And start from the node you're on. This middle term should be saying this is the distance in notes, and the distance in modal half steps would be preferable instead of scale degrees from the location that we're on, of which there are 7 in any collection of notes in Western music, standard collection, and there's another 5 that we could start on but are not in the key. That's fine. We could start from those notes and measure from there as well. But that would be the more logical way to kind of think of the system. So bottom line, memorize. We have to memorize the system as it is, and then we can realize that then we can add the distance in notes so that we can say them in our head with the actual note distance, which is the most important thing, and be able to know in our mind that that second number represents a measurement term which is always too high by 1 if you were actually going to count from the node, whatever node that you are on in the collection of notes. And that way you can still use these terms but not let it mess you up into forcing you out of the best way to optimize the visualization of the fretboard. Not force you to rename the continents, but think about these as proper distance terms, measuring in 2 fundamental fashions, by note distance and by modal half steps, which are off by 1 when you think about the scale degree.